Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my smorgasbord of a co-host, Brett.
Oh, I love how you're just brilliant, Alice. You're just brilliant. Constantly brilliant.
Except I almost called you a smorgasbord, which would be like a robot, I guess.
Yeah, it's like a Star Trek reference.
Well, there is a reason that he's my smorgasbord of a co-host. First of all, you really are. You are like the Renaissance man of all Renaissance men that I've ever known. But this is really not about you, as none of these descriptors are really about you, if you guys have caught on, because we haven't done a legal briefs in several weeks at this point. It was the holidays. Brett lost his voice. He got COVID. Life. But in the interim, even though the world seemed to take a little rest as we celebrated many a holidays and walked into the new year, but true crime news did not take a break. No siree. There was really a smorgasbord of developments in all these cases, from Idaho to Delphi to cases that we don't cover or that we've covered in the past that are kind of popping back up. Natalia Grace. And so today, as kind of a recap of what's happened in the past several weeks, I thought we would talk about these developments, what they mean. Are they big deals, not big deals? You know, is the news covering them correctly? And kind of just discussing it. If you have questions about them, we'd love to answer them.
Absolutely. I feel like the Natalia Grace thing, there's been so many developments, we're going to have to do another episode on that.
We're not going to dive into Natalia Grace just yet, even though we did an episode on her in our other podcast, The Prosecutors. But you're right. There's a lot going on there. That's going to be more than... It would take up the whole smorgas here.
No, I think that's right. And I think, Alice, we should start with a obscure case that no one has ever heard of and is not mentioned on any of our Facebook pages, the Gypsy Rose case. Are you familiar with this person?
I sure am, because who isn't fascinated by this case? This is one of those classic cases where is she the victim? Is Gypsy the victim? Is she the perpetrator? And what happens when she's both, and how do we think about it? And we've seen a lot of kind of divisive comments on people thinking about this particular case because it brings up lots of issues, both on the mental health side as well as the criminal justice side. So, Gypsy Rose.
Well, for those of you who haven't seen the documentary, Mommy Dead and Dearest, I think. It's a very strangely named documentary. It's an excellent documentary. It's very good. And it tells the story of Gypsy Rose. I forget her last name. I just always hear as Gypsy Rose. And essentially, her mother had Munchausen by proxy. And for several years, presented her daughter, Gypsy, as if she had chronic fatal diseases. It was the kind of thing where... You know, they were doing Make-A-Wish, they were going to Disney World, they were getting all these benefits, and it turned out that, in fact, there's nothing wrong with Gypsy. And the documentary is shocking in so many ways, not least of which is the willingness of doctors to treat her, despite the fact there was actually nothing wrong with her. It's a fascinating documentary, and it takes a twist when at some point, when she's older, Gypsy gets a boyfriend who has some mental issues of his own and essentially convinces him to murder her mother, which he does. And at that point, the question, so the deep moral question is this a justified homicide? Is it self-defense? Is it premeditated murder? Is he more culpable or is she more culpable? Who should get more time? And should she ever get out? And spoiler alert, she did get out. In fact, she got out a couple weeks ago after serving, I think she got a 10-year sentence and served, I think she served less than 10.
8 years
it was a parole. Yeah.
Basically,
so she's out
in
now.
the state court justice system, usually you don't serve the entire sentence because there's like good time served. All of this is basically because of overcrowding in the jails. And so if you get a 10-year sentence, it's pretty typical. You'll serve something less than 10 years. And I think she got out right after Christmas. So this is in the midst of, I think a lot of people were maybe taking a break from the news, and then this kind of developed. And there was a lot of discussion as to whether she gets out, especially because her boyfriend, who is no longer her boyfriend, by the way, the one who actually did the killing, I believe is serving a life without parole sentence, life with or without parole. I think it's life without parole.
I think it's without.
Anything much less than 10 years. And he is obviously still sitting in prison.
And I will say this, I don't think he should get out. There's the debates about this have gotten very strange because there are debates. I mean, there are people who feel very passionately about this. There are people who consider her something of a folk hero. And there are other people who think she should be in jail for forever. And there are people who think that she essentially used the tools of manipulation that her mother taught her on her boyfriend and convinced him to commit this murder for her. Blanchard is her last name, people in the chat. Always on top of it. So Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And look, I mean, if you watch the documentary, her mother is not a sympathetic figure in any way. You know, I mean, she is the kind of person who I think my mom, you know, in the great Southern colloquialisms, would say something along the lines of, she's not worth killing. And the argument for Gypsy Rose is essentially she had been so conditioned that her mother was this sort of all-powerful person that she did not feel capable of, like, going to the police. I don't know if I buy that. I mean, it's a complicated case. The thing that's interesting to me, we could talk about the case. We could do multiple episodes on the case. The thing that's interesting to me has been the reaction to her release, because as soon as she was released, she's on Instagram. She has a book that's coming out. I think there's going to be a reality television show.
People are taking pictures of her at like fast food restaurants as if she's a celebrity. Right. And she is treated like a celebrity in a lot of these circles.
She wanted to meet Taylor Swift. She got tickets to the Chiefs game. She was going to go to the Chiefs game, I guess, in the hopes of meeting her. And the problem, as I see it, and I think as a lot of people see it, is it's not clear that she's really getting any of the mental treatment that she probably needs, both because of the years of abuse at the hands of her mother, and also because she served 7 years in prison, and because she's responsible for her mother's death. That's a lot. We talk about this sometimes. We talked about this with Britney Spears, and how when there was the whole Free Britney movement, there was so much focus on Britney Spears has been done wrong. She needs to be free. People don't need to control her. And one of the things we said is there is a reason that she is under this. Maybe part of it is malicious, but part of it is also that there are real mental health issues there. She has them too. And my concern is that this celebrity status thing that people are doing will inevitably lead to yet more trauma for her. That, I mean, nobody wants to be, even if you think you do, eventually you realize you don't like being followed around by people with cameras, even if it's neat initially. The whole paparazzi thing. You know, when does she get privacy? She's married now. She married someone while she's in prison. And so the way this is going to go, I think it's a developing situation. And I don't think it's clear at all that it's going to end up positively.
And, you know, this is a difficult situation because obviously there have been documentaries made about her life under her mother. And truthfully, someone who was kind of under the abuse she was under for so many years, and then going from there straight to prison, essentially. And now this is kind of her first time free, I guess you could say that. There aren't probably many options for her to make money. And so it makes sense from a rational perspective that she's leaning into the celebrityhood. But guess what? You can't make money from celebrityhood unless there is an audience, in which there is in this case. So this is all very interesting because we're all playing a part into this path that seems inevitable, that something bad may result from this, whether it's on a small personal scale for her or on a much larger scale that could involve other people. But this seems like we are barreling towards something disastrous while a lot of people are watching this as sport and watching it as entertainment, when in fact this is not entertainment whatsoever. This entire situation is incredibly devastating. We are not often on this side of things where it's like, in some ways it's post-conviction, right? She's served her sentence. She's still convicted, but she served her sentence. But we're pre any situation where an investigation would need to be started. But we're in this gray area where, we have seen many situations develop, and we can't control what people do. But simply treating this as entertainment, I think, has many pitfalls for everyone involved here.
And one thing I want to address, because it comes up every time we talk about somebody like this, is the Son of Sam laws. People always think you can't profit because of your crime. The Son of Sam laws, number one, that's a New York law. It was passed to prevent people from profiting off of their crimes. There are similar crimes in some states. The initial wave of laws were found to be unconstitutional because they were too restrictive. And you can imagine how that is. We don't like what we call prior restraint in the law. We don't like telling people they can't say something. And saying you can't make any money off of it was sort of interpreted as the same thing. It's like saying we'll have a free press, but there's 100% tax on every newspaper. Like, you couldn't do that, right? And so those laws, they still exist. There's some extent to which they're effective, but they're not really that effective. And I have no idea whether Missouri and Louisiana, which I think are the two places she's going to be, have those laws anyway. I think she will make money off this. And, there's also the question of, is she even making money off the murder? It's not like, if she wrote sort of a book about killing her mother, maybe, but because
there's all the stuff that came before.
Yeah.
Her experience in prison.
Yeah, and you have 1 million followers on Instagram, and you make money off Instagram. Is that making money off your crime? I don't know. Right. So,
and it's simply living her life, right? Like the fact that it is fascinating, and I want her to flourish, right? Because she hasn't been able to do that. There's so many avenues out of it where you obviously understand if that law exists in her jurisdiction, the spirit of the law isn't going to dictate everything, because just the fact that someone could be under that level of manipulation for so many years to now flourish is a book deal in itself, is a movie in itself. It's a Hollywood story, right? And so there are ways there's so much in her life that you can see how even if that law existed in her jurisdiction, it likely wouldn't take away all her First Amendment rights of being able to talk about her life. And right now, that's a lot of what's happening, is she just living her life. And that in and of itself has been fascinating the true crime world.
Yes. So I don't want to spend all our time on her. If you go to the gallery, pretty much every post is about her. Hopefully this will die down soon. But we'll see. I mean, it was a big true crime story, and this was a big event. I think people are reacting to it. It's not surprising. I don't anticipate that in a year we'll still be following every move of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, but we'll see. A relatively minor story out of the Delphi case. The Allen County Superior Court Board of Judges has elected a new chief judge, who I think will probably rein in Fran Gull in all her incompetency in the Delphi case. Oh, wait. No, she was the judge.
Oh, no.
I see.
Wait a second. She's now the chief judge.
That's weird.
So you guys may be thinking, oh, my goodness, how did this happen? What is happening? Here's the thing. Even though in a lot of these court systems, there's going to be a chief judge in just about any jurisdiction, it sounds like police chief, or it sounds something super, king of the world. Chief judge typically means a lot of administrative work, because there's a lot of administration that goes into running a court, a jurisdiction, whether it's how you divvy up cases, making sure caseloads are accurate. There's all the paperwork. Everybody knows the legal system is just filled with paperwork. And the court is no different, has a lot of paperwork, and that kind of administrative work falls upon the chief judge. And it's something that's typically served on rotation among all the judges in that jurisdiction. So there's no like fiefdom forever. Once you're chief forever. That doesn't usually exist in most jurisdictions. And so is the case here in Allen County. Judge Gull, is serving a 2-year term as chief judge, and her additional duties are what you'd expect. Administration of the courts, coming up with policies, maybe things like cameras in the courtroom, that sort of thing, so that there's policies, working groups to make administration of justice within the Allen County court systems just, efficient, effective, administering justice in the best way possible to the people of Allen County.
Yeah. And the one thing I'll say about it is, the way people talk about her because of Delphi, there's this sort of undercurrent of she's completely incompetent, doesn't know what she's doing, and she's biased and corrupt and all this other stuff. And I would say, if all that were true, she would not be selected to be chief judge. They would figure out a way to get around her. I think the fact that she's going to do this just goes to show that whether you agree with what she's doing in Delphi or not, this sort of personal ad hominem attack strategy that some people have adopted it's pernicious, number one, and it's just false, number two. She may very well be reversed by the Indiana Supreme Court. Guess what? She won't be the first judge or the last judge to get reversed. And that doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, it doesn't mean that she's somehow incompetent or corrupt.
And it also shows that she has the respect of her fellow judges, which says something. They're going to be looking to her for these policies and whatnot. So, and by the way, this is interesting. Every court is different, but being chief judge typically comes with it a lot of paperwork, red tape, and kind of the headaches of things. You have to plan certain types of social gatherings and conferences that the court puts on. That's going to be interesting because that's an added load for the next 2 years while she is simultaneously still the judge, because you still have a full docket as the chief judge with Delphi, which is obviously going to involve a lot of work, and it's likely going to happen in the next 2 years. So her being chief judge and her presiding over the Delphi murder case will be at the same time. That doesn't mean she can't do it. Lots of judges do it. I just note that she's going to be very busy. And she's also going to be very intimately involved in a lot of the policies that may come up because of the Delphi case. And she's going to be in the front seat to see how these policies will play out with one of the most national spotlight cases there is, which I think is a good thing. She's going to be able to see how these policies will have real life effect in the cases right before her.
I think if I had the power, my first act as chief judge would be to assign someone else to do Delphi, but
no
presumably she will continue with the case. Okay, so let's just keep going through all the big cases. Murdaugh.
Let's talk about Murdaugh. Oh man, there's so much.
Murdaugh.
I was about to say Idaho, but let's do Murdaugh.
So, as we told you what happened, the evidentiary hearing has been scheduled. It's scheduled to last for 3 days, which is kind of lengthy, but we'll see what happens. It's going to begin on January 29th of this year.
This month,
Can't believe it's already 2024. Yeah, this month. So, the end of this month, we're going to have this 3-day hearing. It's going to be presided over Judge Jean Toll, who I understand is the former Supreme Court Chief Justice for the South Carolina Supreme Court. So, we went from Judge Newman, who is obviously well respected and ran a great courtroom, to someone who has been the Chief Justice. So I think this hearing will be in good hands. It's funny because there are filings going back and forth, as you can expect, and just the gall of Pootie Poot amazes me. So, you guys may recall his big press conference when they made this allegation. And one of the things Pootie Poot said was that the jurors needed to get lawyers. A lot of people interpreted that as a threat. And in fact, turned out it seemed like they said similar things to these jurors when they went and talked to them. So some of the jurors did get lawyers. And today they filed essentially a motion trying to prevent those lawyers from being able to represent the jurors. And their argument was, this is a case between the defendant and the state, and we don't need these lawyers, which is an absurd argument, number one. These jurors are entitled to legal counsel, certainly. I mean, they're being accused of a crime, basically, by Pootie Poot and his companions. So I just thought, just like I said, the absolute gall to have that press conference, say that, and then file something like that. just never ceases to amaze.
Well, I think what we know is that there's going to be more Murdaugh news later this month, which will inevitably take up an entire episode. But because of the smorgasbord of things that have happened, it is just one of many things on our agenda today.
Yes.
So the same day that Gypsy Rose, I mean, it's just true. We could talk about this for the next 30 minutes, but I will spare people. So the same day that Gypsy Rose was released from prison, another interesting true crime development happened that day. And that was, if you remember, the Idaho murders of 4 college students. They were murdered. They were roommates. One of them was the boyfriend of one of the girls who lived there, were found murdered, and Bryan Kohberger has been charged with their murders pending trial relatively early in the case, to be honest. And on December 28th, the university actually razed the house, so destroyed the house where the murders happened, and I think went so far as to bury all the rubble so that people couldn't take souvenirs. In other words, tried to get rid of any sign that that house existed. Now, many of you may be thinking, wait a second, remember when we covered the Murdaugh trial extensively? One of the things that happened during the Murdaugh trial was that the jury was taken to the site of the murders and had a chance to walk around because the layout was somewhat complex. It wasn't just like a shoebox house. It was a property similar to, you may be saying, the Idaho house, which had many points of entry and exit, that there were multiple floors, that 4 people were killed on different floors, and there were other people in the house who were not killed, but who were present at the time of the murders. And there are cameras who caught multiple points and sounds of the murders. Wouldn't it be perhaps of evidentiary value to keep the house? The answer is, from my perspective, yeah, probably. Now, there's no rule saying that this house needs to stay as is. Generally, the way I investigate cases, Brett, I think you're the same, is no matter how seemingly insignificant a piece of evidence is, I always instruct my agents to keep it as is in a locker, locked away, all the things. If it's like a slip of paper that was found next to the gun that we are prosecuting, the defendant for, I try to keep everything, because when you are steps away from trial, multiple steps away from trial, things may pop up that you want to revisit. This house isn't just an insignificant slip of paper next to like a murder weapon. It's kind of like the scene of a crime, a pretty complex crime, in fact, a quadruple homicide with a layout of the house that is not that easily explainable. And I'll say that for myself because I was reading the affidavit, and the affidavit describing the house had me confused at multiple points. I had to kind of sketch out what the house looked like. So I can imagine that it would have evidentiary value. And the prosecution and the defense obviously both had opportunities to go visit the house before it was destroyed. But, the university kind of stood by the viewpoint that this house had was holding all of this trauma for a lot of the students on campus, and they no longer wanted it there, didn't want it standing as a sign of the horrendous, tragic murders of 4 of their students, which I can absolutely understand from a trauma perspective, but from an evidentiary perspective, I really just wish they had waited until trial to destroy the house. I think there are probably other measures they could have taken, put up coverings, put up fences, whatnot. That's my viewpoint, but nothing prevented them from doing that.
Yeah, and look, I think it's one of those things where you have to weigh the potential benefit versus the burden of keeping it. And I totally understand that it's been a year, the university's ready to move on. They don't want it to remind students. They don't want random people coming along. You were talking about souvenirs. There is a Facebook group. It's one of the bigger Facebook groups about Idaho. And I'm a member just to lurk. And some of the things people post in that group about the things they wanted from the house, like they wanted the house number and they wanted this. Maybe someone will save this. And it's like, what is wrong with you? Why are you doing this? I don't understand. I mean, here's the thing. So we talked about Murdaugh about this, who's the host of the Defense Diaries, who a lot of you guys know. And he was, he made a couple of good points. I mean, one of them is it is rare to visit the scene of the crime. And there are plenty of cases where you don't do that, where you rely on photographs and everything else. And they obviously, if they need to, they can construct a 3D model of the place. So maybe it's not the end of the world. But having said that, to me, the point Alice makes is compelling to me. It is confusing. When you read the affidavits, when you read stories about it, the way this house was built is weird and seems significant based on the fact that certain people were murdered and certain people weren't, and why that happened, and where one of the roommates would have been when they would have seen him. And I can imagine going to it would have been very illuminating for the jury. And the other thing that Alice points out that I haven't really seen anybody else say, but is a really good point. You never actually know like how this is going to go and when something might develop where you do need to know. I mean, imagine someone's on the stand and they're testifying and they say something slightly different from what they said before, or something new that implicates the layout of the house, something you can't anticipate until they say it. And then you're like, is that right? Was that the way the house was laid out? Well, now you can't go look.
And by the way, it may not even be the layout, because maybe they have created a 3D model and they have every inch of the house as a model. But what if it were something like, oh yeah, that hallway light always glitched, it shorted. So anytime you flick the light, it shorted all of the lights on the first floor. Maybe that's why the other roommates weren't killed, because they tried to turn on a light and it shorted all the lights. I'm making that up. There's no indication that actually happened. But you can imagine something like that comes out on a testimony, and it has nothing to do with the layout of the house. It has to do with the actual functioning of the house, which is now destroyed, which you never knew to test for because it had never come up before. And things like this, I mean, we have never gone into a trial, and we prep for these trials for months, hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, and there are still always surprises with testimony, because they are live witnesses who are not puppets, and we do not control them. Does not matter how many hours you spend with these witnesses. People are complex, and people's memories have ways of coming back, especially under pressure when they're on the stand, that there is no way to know exactly how a trial is going to go. And not just in trial, but as you're leading up to trial. And so just having lived these like choose your own adventure types of trials for so many years, I personally would be like aghast if my agents came to me and told me they destroyed the house where the murders happened. And I absolutely understand where the university is coming from. It's probably hurting them to have this house, right? I mean, Nancy Grace is showing up to do, broadcasts from there. And so it's causing a lot of attention, negative attention for the university. And it's probably re-traumatizing. A lot of students have to walk by it or see it at all times. They don't want to be known as the murder town. They don't want to be known as the murder university. I get that. I completely get that from a reputational perspective, and even from a well-being of the existing students' viewpoint. But from an evidentiary viewpoint, I think it's a misstep.
I think it's a mistake, and it probably won't matter. I think the most likely outcome is it won't matter. Probably. I think they should have kept it. And maybe I'm being overly cautious, but I think they should have kept it. I don't know. You think about the staircase, right? I mean, they kept that staircase like it was, blood all over it and everything, for a couple of years. And I actually think that probably hurt. I think the jury went to see it. I don't know if the jury went to see it or if they just spent so much time looking at it with all their experts and everything else that it felt like they did. But I don't know. But
that's a good point. The experts could revisit it to do their blood spatter and all their expert stuff, right? In this instance, there was obviously still blood there, but also you can imagine that the way the sliding doors work, the way the stairs are, it was kind of built into a hill or what have you. It wasn't a typical ranch style house. There were multiple floors. You can imagine that would, even the degrees of the steps, because people are having to move in the dark. When you're moving in the dark and in places that are unfamiliar to you and are not cookie cutter houses, there's a certain level of familiarity that helps someone move through the dark when they are not in illuminated hallways. All to say, clearly I'm coming from a lawyer perspective of evidentiary value here, but some of you have wondered, why could the university destroy it? Isn't it privately owned? Yes, it was privately owned, but the owner of the house actually gave it over to the university after the murders. So the university is the owner of the house, and they can do with it what they want, which is why they chose to demolish it.
Which I bet he did that for tax purposes, if I had to guess, because obviously you can't sell that house. So you give it to the university, write it off on your taxes, university tears it down. I think that's probably what happened. And, I'll say this, Alice and I agree, but nobody else does. The defense and the prosecution both agreed to allow it to be torn down. They both did walkthroughs, one last walkthrough of the house before it was torn down. I think the only people who objected were actually some of the family members.
2 of the victims' families, I think, were opposed to it. And then I think at least one of the victims' families were in favor of it. And this is an example where obviously we talk a lot about victims' rights and what victims don't have rights in. Here they couldn't stop it one way or the other. And so it is done. That much is true. We are now in a post-demolition world, and that house no longer exists. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, if at all. It may be nothing, but some of it may also be unknowable. And I do wonder if it can affect some testimony as well, because it's untestable, right? Like now, not that I'm not accusing anyone of lying on the stand, but like if I were to say that this hall light always shorted some other lights, no one could test it. So even if I didn't totally remember it, I feel pretty confident saying it because I know no one can disprove it.
That's a good point. Like, you can have all the photographs in the world, you can have all the 3D animations in the world, but if there's something like that, there's no way to recreate that or know. Without going out there and trying it.
And I say this because I lived in a house in college. I think I've talked about this house before on past episodes. That was a very, it was just a one-of-a-kind house. It was super old, and there were things about this house that were so strange. The French doors, the house had settled in weird ways, that there were French doors right next to my bedroom door that didn't latch, so they never closed. From the outside, and just layout-wise, there were French doors, and there was a bolt on it, but I knew from living there and the way the house settled that literally a strong gust of wind could blow open those French doors. And so every night before we went to bed, we wouldn't bolt the door because it did nothing. We would literally push our couch up against the door, not to keep out intruders because you could just push the couch away, just so that it wouldn't blow open and bang at the nighttime from a gust of wind. That's an example of something you couldn't test now because it wouldn't be obvious from the layout of the house. And you wouldn't know that unless you lived there, because people came over to our house in social gatherings, but they wouldn't know that in the middle of the night, a strong gust of wind could blow open these doors. So this isn't just hypothetical. I think there are very real things about that house that are intangibles in a 3D model that could become important later on.
So we've talked about a lot of cases today. I think we might as well finish up with a case that if we never talked about it again. And I think the last time we talked about it, we said we would never talk about it again. But if there are people in this world who cannot stay out of the spotlight, it is the family of Casey Anthony. And Casey Anthony's parents are back in the news because why not do yet another special? This time, they're going to take a lie detector test. I don't know if Maury Povich is going to be involved or not, but we're going to find out, I guess, whether or not the lie detector test is going to say that they're lying about their knowledge and or involvement in little Kaylee Anthony's death. And you just wonder how much more blood that this family can squeeze out of this turnip.
With that, I don't even want to say more to it because it just makes me sad. You guys know our position on polygraph tests. It is for no reason. The police is not asking them to take it. They're volunteering to take it. Even if this is for a case, there's no pending case, by the way. Polygraphs are not admissible as evidence. So this is purely for, a TV special. And that's, I think, all it deserves.
Yeah, and I think, look, we need to get a polygrapher on to tell us why we're wrong about all this, kind of like we did with Julia, to tell us why we were wrong about profiling, though we weren't as hard on profiling as everybody acts like we were. We're pretty hard on polygraphs. And I have, yeah.
Have you seen a polygraph, Brett? I've seen a polygraph. This is why I'm very opposed to them. I've tested it on myself, and I could force myself to fail.
I've never gotten to take one.
I would get myself amped up. I could answer a question, and I could pass it, because I knew what metrics it was looking for, and it was also the truth. But I'd be like, yes. And then before I answered the same question again, I would breathe really heavily and make my own heart race and fail the same question. I was testing it myself because I was curious. And because of that experience, I'm like, I have a pretty strong feeling about polygraph tests.
Jason Blair in the chat makes a good point. The only reason to do it is so you can tell the person they failed and see if they crack. That's like the only reason to do it. Like whether they failed or not, just tell them they failed. It's like if you've ever seen The Wire, they didn't have the polygraph wasn't working or they didn't have it or something. And so they just rigged up a copy machine to make it look like it was a polygraph. And
it's kind of like the tactic where you pretend like your co-conspirator or, whatever, co-perpetrator is in the other room and you storm across and you slam the door and you said, you know what? Brett's sitting across the way. He is ratting you out. You come clean right this second before I leave this room. I'll give you the better deal. But Brett's not even over there. Brett's like out, partying. It's the same thing. They're just different tactics of making people crack.
But let's assume for a second that they can work in a real setting where you're in a room with the polygrapher going through it in a very sort of scientific way. Even if it could work in those circumstances, doing it in a studio with a camera on you for some sort of made for television whatever, I don't even it's not going to tell you anything. I don't care if they pass or fail. It doesn't tell you anything. It's the whole thing's absurd. And these people, I won't either. You guys can tell us.
That's been a lot of fun. Look at all the smorgasbord we covered.
Don't expect another legal brief about that. I'm proud. I'm very proud, Alice. And I think we've managed to hit all the big legal events.
Yes.
Of the last
and if
few
we
weeks.
haven't answered your questions about them, we are happy to hear about them. And I need to go watch some Natalia Grace documentaries before we really dive into that, because I think that's going to be a little bit more complex. Before we sign off on these things, was there anything you wanted to say about the smorgasbord of cases? I just really want to say that word. It's such a great word.
Other than Casey Anthony, we will be revisiting all of these. So I will hold my tongue until then.
With that, we've told you guys to ask your questions in 5-star reviews on legal briefs. And boy, did you come out in force. So Brett, do you want to answer some questions today?
Let's answer some questions. Okay, let's see.
Just by the way, I don't know if you can tell, but I had dental work done today and half my face is still numb. I can't quite talk.
Never would have known, Alice.
I have bitten my tongue talking to you like 5 times tonight. I just want you to know if the audio comes out and people are like, what's wrong with Alice's face? That's why.
I bite my tongue talking to you all the time. Okay. Will from San Antonio wants to know, what is the most annoying Hollywood trope in law movies / TV shows?
I would say, I know. I have a great one. I was about to say Perry Mason moments, but I'm not going to say that.
Okay,
because Perry Mason moments typically don't happen. The most annoying trope as a lawyer is that everyone rolls into trial looking like they're on the freaking Victoria's Secret runway, because in reality, you look like trash because you haven't slept in weeks and your hair is disgusting because you haven't showered in forever and you've eaten peanut M&Ms every single day for every meal. And so you're breaking out and you look gross. So the fact that people actually look good in trial is not how I live my life.
Yes, that's 100% right. I think Law & Order always did a pretty good job of that because Jack looks like he just rolled out of a bar every time he shows up. But everything
Which is
else,
accurate.
Everybody's like pure GQ. That's a great example. I was going to say the fact that trials are interesting.
That's
for
a
the
good
most
one,
part. I mean, they're really interesting when you're doing them, but watching them, like I go over and watch trials every now and then. Most of them are just, if it's not yours, it's like, oh my goodness. Like you see the poor judge sitting up there. I always think, man, the poor judge, he's like sitting up there. He's like, somebody object to something so I can do something.
I'm trying to think through all my trials. And I think in every one of my trials, the judge at some point has fallen asleep.
Or certainly seemed like they were.
Even if just for a second. And they might just be looking pensively at their lap. But that's how boring trials typically are.
And see, their trick is they've got real-time court reporting. So, like, they can fall asleep if somebody objects and they kind of wake up and they just scroll back a few pages and read what just happened. And then they can rule on it. So
my favorite was a trial Brett and I did, and it was a long trial. And there were some pretty boring parts of it. People would be on the stand for hours, if not days at a time. And even if the most interesting person is on the stand, after several days of listening to them, it gets pretty monotonous. And the judge was tired because we were going many, many weeks. And every time we objected or anytime there was an objection at all, the judge would immediately sit up and read the transcript, like the last 10 pages. And the judge didn't care how long it took him to read the transcript. He would read it slowly, made sure he read everything because I'm not sure anyone was listening. And then there would be silence for about 5 to 10 minutes while the judge got up to speed and then ruled on the objection. The rulings were always spot on, but it was I do what I want.
That trial taught me something. And if you're ever on a jury, you can pay attention to this. If the judge ever sits up and starts to pay attention, that's when you know something interesting is happening. And something you should probably pay attention to as well, because that did happen a couple times. And it usually
has to do with the lawyers, too. So you better be afraid or make sure it's not you that's the reason the judge is sitting up.
Yeah, that's totally true. Okay, so let's answer this one. This is from E. Patrick Lyons. I don't know if that's his actual name, but whatever. He says, I am a public defender. In your opinion, what makes a good defense lawyer and a bad defense lawyer?
That's a great question. I think we've said this many times before. We love litigating against great lawyers. So vigorous advocacy, knows the law, argues within the bounds of the law, doesn't make up things, doesn't throw harebrained arguments, bad arguments at the wall, because when they do that, the prosecutor actually has to make sure constitutional rights are being protected and almost have to step in some ways to protect the defendant in those cases. So a good defense attorney is a good attorney for their client, doesn't just argue any argument for the sake of argument, but finds and hones in on the best legal factual argument for their client and focus their energies on that as opposed to trying the spaghetti on the wall approach, because even good arguments get lost in the spaghetti at the wall approach.
And that trial that Alice mentioned, it lasted a month. It had 100 witnesses, 2,000 exhibits. It was very complex. If we had had bad lawyers, bad defense lawyers in that case, it could have made it torturous for everybody and wouldn't have benefited their client. But that defendant had really good lawyers who really knew what they were doing. And that is so important. You want a good defense lawyer who, from the prosecutor's perspective, you want one who actually holds everyone accountable. Because I don't want it being reversed either. I don't want an ineffective assistance of counsel claim later on, because I'll just go and tell you, most of these cases you see that are overturned where someone is quote unquote exonerated are actually either prosecutorial misconduct or ineffective assistance of counsel. That doesn't mean you're exonerated. It means your conviction was overturned. And a lot of times the ineffective assistance of counsel thing is so relatively minor. I mean, look, take Adnan. If you think that his attorney was ineffective for not talking to Asia McClain, if she had just talked to her and put her on the stand, it wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have mattered. It would not have prevented Adnan Syed from being convicted. But because she didn't do that later on, maybe it's going to result in him being having his conviction vacated or whatever. And you don't want that to happen. So yeah, I want a defense attorney who knows the law, who argues the things that matters, that doesn't waste my time, the court's time, the jury's time with frivolous objections, and that also is always advocating for his client. Because the most frustrating thing is when you have a defense attorney who gets all wrapped up in their own arguments or some sort of ancillary thing and are missing what's actually best for their client. And that's really annoying. And the other thing, as prosecutors, we don't like to have to argue for your client, for you. It's awkward for us to get up and be like, well, Your Honor, you might want to consider this provision that would allow you to sentence this person to a lower sentence that somehow his defense attorney never brought up. We don't want to be in that position of doing that.
And we've had to do that so many times, especially in sentencings. I really actually don't like it when defense counsel, we talked about how we bring cases, Brett and I bring cases that we think are well beyond a reasonable doubt. We kill a lot of cases on the front end if we don't think the evidence is up to muster. But I don't like it when a defense counsel tries to be all chummy with me and they think that they're building a relationship with me by talking about how guilty their client is. I know how guilty your client is. I did the investigation and I turned over the discovery to you. Your job is to defend your client, not make up arguments and not necessarily argue that he's innocent if he's not, but kind of speaking about how bad your client is in front of your client to me, I think completely destroys that trust with your client. And I want you to be that person's advocate, even if we're off the record. We can build rapport in other ways. We can build rapport by you being an honest advocate, for example. I don't need you to come over and be like, dude, what a POS over here that I'm defending, right? And that actually happens a lot more than you may think. And I think it's just people wanting to, I don't know, sort of relationship with me as the prosecutor when that's not what I want from the defense counsel.
Okay, last question. This is a fun one, so, less heavy. This is from Moon Party of 4. I love all the names that people come up with. And they want to know, since you noted this was the fast pass, which what we said was there were so many questions for the prosecutors, you can go straight to the front of the line if you use legal briefs. I must know, Disney World or Disneyland, and what's your favorite ride?
So I've only ever been to Disney World, not Disneyland. And as a child, I had an aunt who lived in Florida, so we went to Disney World a lot. I haven't been to Disney World more recently, so I don't know what new rides there were. But I personally, it's not even called Epcot Center anymore, right?
That's what I call it. I don't know.
Okay, well, I personally loved Epcot Center all throughout my childhood because it was like the future. And I just remember for some reason, like it tickles me, pink today, that there was like the phone unattached to the wall with like a mannequin talking on a video phone. And like I can still see what the future looked like at Epcot Center and how far we've come. And it just tickles me. That's not really a ride, but it's like an experience of what the world was supposed to look like. And now I live in the future.
So I've been to Disneyland and Disney World, and Disneyland is fine. It's Disneyland. It's the original, right? Yay. But Disney World is so much better. And there's so much more you can do. And you can do basically everything you can do at Disneyland. So my favorite ride, I'm going to give you two. My personal favorite ride, which you can do at Disneyland, I assume it's still at Disneyland, Disney World, is the Tower of Terror, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror.
Oh, that terrified me as a kid.
Oh, it's so awesome.
It's so scary.
I mean, the last time I went to Disneyland, since there's nothing else to do, we basically just rode it over and over and over again. It's so amazing.
My gosh.
That's my favorite. But, so this year, the CrimeCon was in Orlando. And those of you who've gone to CrimeCon, you know that, like, it gets started Thursday night, and then Friday and Saturday are the big days. And then by Sunday, most people are leaving. Everybody's checking out. They're wrapping up. So there's just not a whole lot going on. So we decided to take my daughter, who had come with us to Orlando, who just turned 4, to Disney World. She had no idea where we were going to go because we weren't planning on going, actually. Like we got down there like, we're not going to do this. But then the hotel was right next to it. And like, how can we not go? We have to take her. So what we did was, because she's little and she's young, and she really just wanted, she didn't know what she wanted to do, but we decided we're just going to do a half day. So we got up as early as we could, got out to Disney World. When the gates opened, we were in there, which is the way to do it. And, she got to meet all the princesses. When she met Ariel, it was so overwhelming for her because she loves Ariel very much. And it was just so awesome to watch. And she loved the seashells, which is the Ariel ride. So the seashells are now one of my favorite because of how much, like there was one moment where we were riding, I don't know which time this was that we were riding the seashells, but we're riding and I look over and she's looking up at me with this look of just like pure joy and love on her face. And I just thought, This is everything. So I'm going with the seashells. It's my favorite.
That is very sweet. That's really, really sweet. I like I said, I haven't been back to Disney World in like 25 years. I don't know when I'll go, but
maybe next time CrimeCon's in Orlando, you can go. Or if CrimeCon goes to Los Angeles, we can go, or Anaheim, wherever it is.
Maybe we can. But first, CrimeCon in Nashville, and we'll see y'all there in just a couple months now. I kind of like how it like moved up, so we don't have to wait a whole year to see everybody.
And remember, code prosecutors if you want to attend.
There you go. Well, thank you guys for joining us for this True Crime Legal Updates episode. And write in with what you'd like to hear about on these Legal Briefs episodes. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. record. By the way, sorry, did we have an agenda for today?
Well,
I know we're going to talk about everything.
Yeah, we were just going to talk about everything.
There's a lot.
Can you hear me fine now?
I can hear you fine. Keep talking. Let me see if there's a delay.
I'm going to keep talking. I'm going to turn off my... Let's see. I'm going to look at what we talked about earlier.
So far, we seem to be driving on timing, not delayed or anything.
Okay. We got plenty of stuff to talk about. I mean...
Yeah.
We got plenty of stuff to talk about. Okay. It's just a news smorgasbord, as I said.